What's up, friends? Welcome back to the Banners Fly Forever football podcast. This is Dan and Tim with a very special guest tonight. We have John Vogel of the Sick Draft podcast. I'll have all his links for all his socials in the description. Don't you worry about that. You don't want to miss any of John's coverage. He covers the entire draft process. He is on site at the Senior Bowl. He interviews players. He does a little bit of everything when it comes to the draft. So John, I got to ask you, I imagine this is like crazy season for you. I'm sure your schedule is like super packed. We're lucky to get you on for an hour on this show. How is pre-draft going for you? Tell us.
Cool. Well, thanks first off for having me on. And, you could cut it. I'm going to go ahead and just take a second to blow your heads up before you get this thing started. But Dan, it's been great getting to know you, and so anytime that you want to do this, I try to make that time, try to get on here to jump on with you.
Appreciate it.
I would appreciate the punctuality on top of everything. You've got me the link 10 minutes before we're ready to roll. You give me the questions in the morning. Like, a lot of times I don't have questions, so I'm always ready to kind of go in there, bang, bang, guns blazing. But now I have a little bit of time to prep and take a look and laugh at some of the questions you're going to give me. So, it was good. It's always a good time to come on here. It's always it's a no-brainer to just, hey, take the time. And I know that at some point, Dan, you're going to rise up to the top. I think in this industry, you just got to stick with it like I did. I'm not at the top yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
I appreciate it, John. I appreciate it, John. Always got nice words for me. So let us not cut any cheese and let's just jump right into our questions. So one thing Tim and I talked about kind of leading into NFL free agency was the running back market. I'm from the greater New York area, so the big conversation was, is Saquon staying? Is Saquon going? Is he being paid? That was the center of all the media coverage when it comes to the New York Giants. Now we see, Saquon winds up in Philadelphia. You got DeAndre Swift going over to the Bears, Derrick Henry to the Baltimore Ravens. The one thing Tim and I kind of agreed on heading into free agency was like, because there's so many big names, and, the way running back contracts are, do we see those veterans hang out on the open market for a little while? Well, much to our surprise, the running back contracts are probably the first group of contracts to come in on that Tuesday afternoon. I think DeAndre Swift was the very first one announced. So My question for you from a draft process standpoint is the NFL showing their hand that they are kind of out on the 2024 running back classes? Is that the main takeaway from free agency so far?
Yeah. So with the running back group in this class, I think we've gotten so accustomed to seeing deep running back classes and guys that could come in and contribute right away. And a lot of times when you go back into, the underclassmen lists every year that come out, the guys that declare early for the draft, there's a large portion of them that are typically running backs. And the reason for that is because, we talk about wear and tear on their bodies, getting, into the NFL, making that money before you get that chance. Well, for a lot of these running backs in college right now, they're making NFL money, or at least a portion of it, of what they would make if they left. So we saw that underclassmen list drop to 52 players this year. And that's from 5 years ago. That's a almost 200% decrease in the guys that declared early. So, yeah, I think that for that reason, the running back class is a lot weaker because we didn't see a lot of those guys that typically declare, the Keaton Mitchells that don't get drafted, the top tier running back guys that go back for a senior year, or to take advantage of a COVID year that we don't normally see that position group do because they're making good money on the NIL markets, being a star for their team. So why would you leave that and go be a committee back somewhere, make the kind of minimum NFL salary and maybe play 4 years? Milk that college money all the way out, man. Milk it, So that's kind of what the attitude has been. And yeah, it does talk to or point to the lack of talent in the running back class and the reason why they would go out and go get these veterans and spend a little bit of money because look at the guys that got signed: Swift, Barkley, Pollard, Henry, the guys that you mentioned. These are all guys that can be number one running backs, right? And they've shown that at some capacity of their career. You could make an argument, say Pollard's better as a 2. I think he is personally.
Well, let's be honest. We are a Tajay Spears fan club in this place. So.
Me too. So
as far as we're concerned on this show, Tony is the backup.
we were at the Senior Bowl watching him, right? And I was hyping him up, and I was like, I love this guy. He's going to be an NFL running back. And, we got to see a little bit at the end when Derrick Henry
Right.
started to kind of drop that usage a little bit, and they started to use Spears more. And you're going to see him probably fill a running receiver role next year with the
Yeah.
Titans. I would fully anticipate. But anyway, so the point is, those are all guys that can be number one running backs. You can make the argument for Pollard. You can make the argument for Derrick Henry getting old, but he's still a power back that gets downhill, and he's bigger than everybody. I mean, I saw this guy at Titans training camp a few years ago, and I remember thinking the first thing that went through my head was, golly, people tackle this thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was walking down and I was field level walking in, and he took off, ran through the line. You could see the top of his helmet as he runs through the hole, and then he comes running out of there, and you're like, that's a defensive end. That's not a running back. But that's how Derrick Henry's always been. So, you know, they were willing to dish out a little bit of money, knowing that they're not going to spend a lot of high draft picks, even day 2 draft picks on running backs. I think you're going to see the main bulk start to come off in the 4th round. That's where I'm anticipating the run. I saw Daniel Jeremiah. I think he said late second, early third. I mean, it could be there too. I'm not fully anticipating that. It just kind of, we'll see how the board falls. But, there's a lot of guys that have question marks. There's a lot of guys that don't grade very high. There's a lot of guys that, they're going to be really good feature back or backup, rotational guys, but there's not a feature back in this class. There's not a guy that you point to and go, hey, Blake Corum, he could be our running back 1. We don't know that. He's smaller. He had a really good offensive line at Michigan. That can make you look a lot better too. So who is it? Who is the
Right.
number one? Jalen Warren, you can even say, okay, he's got breakaway speed, but he's not consistent on a snap-to-snap basis. He doesn't have great field vision. If you give him a lane, he's gone. But who's the top guy in this class? Nobody really knows.
Sure.
I think it's probably Benson. He'll probably be the first guy off the board out of Florida State. He looks like he's probably there. But, we're still talking maybe end of day 2,
Right.
3rd round. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Is
or
there-
even Jonathan Brooks is a name that a lot of people like, but he's coming back from injury,
From
so
ACL. Yeah.
that is medicals is something that we in our community will never really have access to, and it's so hard to form opinions and write scouting reports with that information. But obviously the NFL teams they do have access to that. Everyone likes to talk about nowadays that the guy who did the surgery for his knee is the Cowboys doctor, and like they're already linking,
And
Jerry to Jonathan Brooks.
Yeah, and the Cowboys, they typically use the bolt through the knee, which was Adrian Peterson. He tried it when he tore his ACL, I think in 2010 or 11. And the idea is you wrap the muscle around the bolt so it grows back, and the bolt reinforces it. And then AP went and ran for 2,000 yards after it. The problem is when you wear and tear down, the other knee is a lot weaker. And so you're typically going to tear the other knee. I don't know if Brooks got that bolt in his knee, but that's going to be in the medical report. Hey, he got the bolt. They did the surgery. There's a very high likely that he's going to tear his other ACL. You're going to have to put a bolt through that one too. And then you're going to lose him for another year, so that factors into the evaluation as well.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was on Fantasy Pros with like fantasy football. I was looking over the dynasty rookies coming in this year, and they had all their experts compiled rankings. They had 5 different guys that got number 1 votes out of running backs, which I don't know if I've ever seen that in a class. But I was wondering, like, is there anyone that you kind of are sneaky high on in this class? Like somebody that could appear maybe a year or 2 down the line, like, Kyren Williams, after his rookie year, we're kind of like, I don't really know what this guy's going to be or anything. And now all of a sudden we're looking at Kyren Williams going like, okay, well, it looks like he has a pretty built-in role, in the NFL. Is there any running back that you're kind of like, I think people are a little lower on him right now, but he has the goods to become, a franchise running back for a team?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it's so much of it is projection. But,
Sure.
If you wanted to go with a safe guy, like a Will Shipley,
Yeah.
Out of Clemson.
Yeah.
I think I watched a few Clemson games live, and I think I talked about this on the pod last week, but I was saying I hate Clemson, and that's kind of something that I've notoriously been. But I was a little bit lower on Shipley until I sat down and I graded him, and I was kind of impressed with his overall skill set. I think he's one of those sneaky guys. He's not really flashy. You see that he's kind of missing some things here and there. when you're watching him live. But then when you sit down, and you kind of watching, okay, 4.46 speed. He's pretty darn quick laterally. He's very strong. He can be a good receiver out of the backfield. You can run routes from outside in the slot. So now you kind of put all in pass protecting. He's a better pass protector than a lot of these running backs are coming out right now.
Mhm.
So you kind of put all those things together and you're like, this is a guy that's sneaky. I wouldn't want him to be my running back one, but give him a couple years and maybe,
Sure.
if he's in the right situation, he's a guy that they end up leaning on a lot more, maybe to an injury or something, and he kind of produces.
For sure. So kind of leaving the running back position and going to everybody's favorite when we start talking about the draft, the quarterback position. It is interesting because Dan and I were kind of talking about this a little bit with the last few classes. In 2022, obviously it was a low class. So everybody was going, wait till next year we get Bryce Young, we get CJ Stroud. And even last year it was kind of like, yeah, this class is good, but next year we get Caleb Williams. Well, I don't feel like we're getting that talk for the 2025 class. And there are some teams that seemingly are going to be without, a quarterback that you would see as a franchise guy going into this year. We have, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and then whoever ends up getting JJ McCarthy. But there's more than just 4 teams out there that are in need of quarterback right now. So whichever those teams are, maybe it's the Broncos, maybe it's the Giants, the Cowboys, if they're not going to bring Dak back, apparently. What does the 25 class look like for those teams? Is it anywhere close to what we're looking at this year? And are there guys that, could end up being the Jaden Daniels or the Joe Burrow of that class that kind of pop in out of nowhere?
Excuse me. I think there's a bunch of guys that are interesting. Like a TJ Finley, he's floated around for a long time. Ended up at Western Kentucky. That's a school that's been pumping quarterbacks the last few years, doing a really good job helping guys kind of show their skill set. I wouldn't bet on him,
Okay.
but he's a guy that you definitely want to keep an eye on because he's 6'7". He's got a massive arm. But no, I think the number one guy from what I've heard, talking with my friends in, personnel departments and, just kind of trying to get a feel for what are people planning on projecting, that kind of stuff. It seems that Shador Sanders is the number one guy next year right now. I don't think there's a whole lot of intrigue in a guy like Quinn Ewers.
Sure.
I think he needs to have a really good year. It is not set. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of football still to be played, but I think there's gonna be a couple small school guys you want to keep an eye on, like Finley, like Caden Salter at Liberty, who very, very explosive quarterback, was a 5 or 4-star prospect. It was at the University of Tennessee, got caught up in the whole McDonald's scandal bag. The money through that, but it ended up having to leave the university. But those are kind of the guys. I'm looking through my list a little bit. Man, yeah, it's tough. Maybe a Matt Sluka. Sluka had a really good year at Holy Cross and transferred up to Nevada, Las Vegas. I think you're going to see a lot of people talk about Kyle McCord, Jalen Daniels out of Kansas, but injuries. Could he stay healthy?
Right.
Yeah, there's not like a set guy. Jackson Dart might be a guy to keep an eye on at Ole Miss, but yeah, no, it's not like it's going to be like, oh, we're going to lose a bunch of games this year and feel really good about our quarterback next year. I don't think for really anybody at this point.
Sure.
Yeah, and then obviously that whole Colorado story, took the college football world by storm this year. With Dion there, again the fans back out again and everything, and it's kind of like the first real test of let's build through the transfer portal almost exclusively, because Dion brought his kids, from Jackson State, and now this offseason he's going to be going around the country recruiting, trying to bring people in. So, you got to think, is that team around Shador going to be even better and let him, kind of showcase that skill set a little bit more? Because he did have a lot of good games last year, but, there were a lot of highs to go with a lot of lows.
Right.
And the one thing people say is oh, look at his supporting cast around him, and look at Colorado going from a 4-win, 2-win program to, playing headline games on Friday night. It's such a big turnaround from 1 year. And, what is that next step going to be for year 2? And then you also got to consider, all the baggage that comes with him. Dion's already out there saying, Shador might not play for certain teams depending on how the draft plays out. And obviously Dion's, yeah, obviously Dion's a huge personality and deserves it for, his skills when he was a player. But it's going to be a very interesting time, both on the field and off the field for Shador throughout the college football season and then during the pre-draft process next year.
Yeah, and there's talk already of not colleges but NFL teams trying to work out a package deal. So
yeah, but the coaching,
yeah, exactly. So when you start to think about that a little bit, and you start to think about some of the openings that could be there next year, you start kind of scratching your head, going, well, that might be why they're starting to talk already about. Well, it depends. He may not play for certain teams and blah blah blah.
Hold on a second. Is this the storyline before it's leaked? Is it, Dion and his son joining up with Jerry Jones in Dallas? McCarthy and Dak are out. Is come on, that's the
it's
script,
an interesting
right?
thought.
That's what's going to happen.
Warm weather.
It's and a dome.
And a dome.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting thought. And I don't know. We'll see. I think if I remember correctly, they play high school in Texas too.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
So Dion's familiar with that area. The transfer portal thing's interesting with him too, because the first thing that they addressed, they hammered as soon as the portal became open, was offensive line. They were going and getting guys that are borderline PFA draftable types. And so they understood the assignment this year from a team building standpoint. Hey, we got to get better in these trenches. That's where we kind of got our butts handed to us all year, was trying to manage that. So they added some of those pieces. They added some nice defensive pieces. I was surprised going through the list. I think I went through it 2 or 3 days ago. And then even adding a couple of really good weapons. They brought in Will Shepard from Vanderbilt. That's an underrated wide receiver who may get drafted very high next year. Is a very solid possession route runner. So it is an experiment. We've seen teams flip their rosters and become very successful, but Dion kind of started to realize, hey, it's not just about our skill guys. We got to back up, the trenches to unlock those skill guys. And I think that's what he's learned in his first year at Colorado.
Did I see they added Warren Sapp as one of his coaches as well
today?
So
he did.
It's like it's star power even in the coaching, right? Like it's whatever's going to get these guys to want to come and play for some big names.
There was a lot of NFL guys in last year's staff, and that was kind of, I think, part of the issue too. Talking with people around the league, they felt like he demoted some people in wrong situations during in season, and bringing up Pat Shurmur and bringing him up and elevating him toward the end of the year. He's learning, he's learning how to be a coach, and he's kind of doing it on the seat of his pants. But I think you're gonna see a much better Colorado team in the Big 12 next year, and I think they're going to be competitive.
Absolutely.
For sure. All right. So, we mentioned how Colorado is, building through the trenches, and that kind of transitions into our next question is, the NFL trenches. So, I feel like, interior offensive line, interior defensive line, your defensive tackles, your guards, your centers kind of been, I guess, less talked about, from a casual fan standpoint, I would say. But I think we're seeing a trend recently where these players are receiving, not better contracts, but the contracts are becoming more aligned with your, tackles and your edge defenders and your edge rushers. And it's kind of like the NFL's placing a slight premium on the interior, both the offensive and the defensive line. Do you think that we're going to see that start to translate to the NFL draft? When you talk about a player like Jerzon Newton, Byron Murphy, or even when you talk about the offensive side of the ball with Jackson Powers Johnson or Graham Barton from Duke, are we going to see those players pushed up draft boards a little bit because teams are going to realize hey, if these guys hit, the market's trending towards an increased contract for those positions, let's lock up a starter in the draft and, kind of get a cost saving. You see that with wide receiver market, wide receivers make so much money. So people try to grab them in the draft to save that salary cap space. Is that something that's going to start happening with, interior linemen?
I think we saw the increase this year and it was basically because you've got. Let's look at the offensive tackles that were free agents this year. Can you name one?
Morgan Moses. Yes,
Yeah.
it was all like, end
That's
of the
a
career
great
type
point.
of guys as far as like the big names. The Jonah Williams, but
Yeah.
Castaway.
Yeah,
former
so
high draft pick.
not a lot
Nobody.
to pick
Yeah.
on. Maybe Trent Brown out of New England.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you name an edge rusher that's a free agent this year? Jonathan Grenard.
Yeah, Jonathan Grenard was Daniel Hunter.
Danielle Hunter. I know I'm forgetting one. I'm thinking, but Brian Burns, he got tagged.
Well, yeah, the other
Burns
ones
got
that moved got traded.
Yeah. So that's my point is the salary cap increased $25 million this year.
Yeah.
And so agents had a field day with it going, hey, we got all this talent in the interior lines, okay? And you don't, what are you going to go spend it? Who are you going to spend it on the outside?
Right.
So the market, I think, kind of dictated the movement this year. Does it hold? Most likely, because I think it's gonna start to snail's pace forward, right? It's going to slowly increase after this year. I think it's capped out for the next 5 years or so. In the draft, I don't think it's necessarily going to have too much of an impact. And the reason for that is because, you look at Graham Barton. That's a guy who can play all 5 positions. So he's going to go higher, because of the absolute versatility that he has. Hey, you need a center, plug him there. You need a right guard, plug him there. You need a left tackle, plug him there. You're going to feel good about it. Those 2 defensive tackles, Newton and Murphy, they're good prospects, but they're not like top tier, great defensive tackles. Like, oh, we're pounding the table for these guys going, there's no way that you don't hit on these guys, So I think because there's so many more offensive tackles in this class, you're going to see them go fast. That's going to push these guys down the board.
Right.
And I think you're going to be able, I don't think you're going to see that adjustment quite yet in the draft. And then like a Jackson Powers Johnson, he might be one of the more overrated guys in this class, with the way that, NFL teams kind of talk about his lower body, doesn't have a lot of strength to come down. He's very top heavy and he plays like it sometimes, getting his pad level up a little high. So I don't think as many teams are as high on him as the media is. He could still slip into the first round, but I think we're looking at him as more of a day 2 guy. If you need a center in the first round, it's probably going to be Graham Barton.
It's interesting too because I was thinking about like those guys that were invested highly into early in the draft. Like Quentin Nelson obviously is like kind of one of the bigger guards of recent that was drafted very highly. And you even think about like he's been great, don't get me wrong, but like the Colts still haven't figured out their entire line, and it's been a problem for years. And putting that investment that early into the draft in an interior line compared to a tackle, it does kind of, it's a great point you're bringing up about just like those guys that are great at those positions, those premier positions, they just do not hit free agency, right? I mean, it's why if you're going to go get a premier wide receiver, you do it in the draft because they never show up in free agency. But more and more we're seeing them in trades. But I feel like definitely as far as interior offensive linemen, that seems to be one that you can find like veterans a lot more often. And yeah, the tackles, even the guys that do hit free agency, you're kind of questioning like, why are they hitting free agency, right? Like, I mean, like there's a reason why these dudes are getting giant contracts somewhere, because it's such a position of need. But it's like, why did the team give up on them in the first place? So yeah, it's a very good point about the salary cap going up and who do we give all this money to? Kind of is what.
Yeah.
Right?
And the other thing too is with the interior, a lot of people don't realize this, but when tackles, they start to lose a step or they have an injury, a lot of times they shift inside to guard, because they lose that lateral quickness, that lateral explosion, whatever they were leaning on to make them a great tackle. So a lot of your interior guys anyways, your guards are tackles. That's one thing I always talk to agents. Agents hit me up all the time. Hey, what about, have you seen this guard? Have you seen that guard? And it's like, hey, if he's a high priority free agent, man, you're better off probably not touching him.
Sure.
Just because from an investment standpoint as a guard, there's not a lot of spots for you, and there's a lot of guards that come up that can play, so it's kind of you better have some intel, with 2 or 3 teams that are like, oh, we absolutely love this guy before you start working with him. But that's really what it is because there's so many tackles that kick inside and end up playing guard for the most of their career. That's a tough position You know, for a veteran guy, like a top tier guard that hits the free agent market, well, he's hitting the free agent market because it's like, well, we need a drafted tackle anyways. Could just kick our right tackle inside the right
Sure.
guard. Hey, you're without a job, buddy. We don't need you anymore. We're not going to give you $10 million to come back here.
Absolutely. So we'll move on from those interior guys and talk about probably the position that's become a highly sought after premier position in the NFL that maybe isn't the first one on the common fan's mind, but the cornerback position. And this class is kind of interesting, right? Because there's a lot of guys, and I feel like everybody has a different guy that they love the most. So we just want to know why Quinyon Mitchell's got to be your favorite along with us, right?
You listen to podcasts? Is that what happened? No. So
we've been Quinyon fans for a long time over here.
Quite a while here.
Yeah, so Quinyon, I think, has had the best pre-draft process I think I've ever seen.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
With the way he came into the Senior Bowl and took care of business there, he had some really awesome battles with Roman Wilson all week, and opted out after the second practice, and then goes to the combine and absolutely blows everybody's minds, running a 4.33. Like, where did that come from?
Yep.
So Quinyon's got speed, he's got length, he's twitchy. Definitely, I think he's by far and away the corner one in the class. I know a lot of people like Terry and Arnold. I know a lot of people like Quinyon, Kool-Aid McKinstry and Nate Wiggins and guys like that. But I think that there's a clear gap between Quinyon and the rest of the corners in this class because everybody still kind of has these question marks. It's kind of like when you look at Terry and, okay, he's very fluid. But he ran a lot slower than I thought he was going to because you watch him on tape and it doesn't look like he's moving at full speed a lot of the time. It looks like he's just kind of gliding with the guy. He's matching him and you're just like, man, he's so smooth. He's kind of like Jalen Johnson, very similar skill set. They tested almost identically. You got a guy like Nate Wiggins. It's like Nate has got that crazy speed, 4.28, pulled his hammy at the end of it. But golly, you put on the tape and you're like, this guy's giving 2-3 steps every single rep and getting back into play somehow, getting the job done. Like, you work, if you're in the AFC North, you've got this guy off your board. Like, you can't take this guy with Joe Burrow, playing him twice a year. Are you kidding me? He would torch you. So, so he's got questions. Kool-Aid had the long speed concerns, tested decently well, but he's still got the foot injury. He's got the medical stuff. And had some issues on tape where it kind of looked like, hey, I'm the best guy out here on the field. And it was, you're watching, you're kind of like, nah, Dallas is pretty good. Terrian on the other side's pretty good. That Caleb Downs freshman's pretty good. Like, you might want to step it up there a little bit, buddy. But Kool-Aid, I think I liked him. I didn't love him, so there's a lot of guys like that in this class where it's like, hey, they got question marks. You can point to Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky. I loved his game in Senior Bowl, I thought. And then he went and tested extremely well. Vertical leap was like 42 inches. Broad was 11.4. I mean, crazy, crazy explosive ability. And then Jarvis Brownlee also had a really good Senior Bowl. There was a couple guys at the Shrine Bowl that had a really good week, between Roe Torrance, the Florida State. I think Jarian Jones, he had a really good week, So there's going to be guys, but there's not going to be people that they're going to target early. And I think once you get past Arnold and Mitchell, you're probably looking at maybe Kool-Aid slips up in the first. Wiggins might get in the first because he's just got that crazy speed. But it's a rough class for corners, in my opinion, if you're needing a guy that needs to play like right now.
Sure. kind of just to transition slightly, we talk about Cooper DeJean. It's a player, he's coming back from injury, like we mentioned with a couple other guys in this class, but I've seen a lot of people saying that they're not sure if they project him at corner at the next level, maybe more of a safety type. What's your take on Cooper and like where he might slide in when it comes to draft capital?
The number one thing with it being a corner is not necessarily natural athletic ability. You want to have that. I'm not saying dismiss it, but what's even more important at the corner position, I think, is reactive athletic ability. So if you look at Cooper is a excellent natural athlete. The way that he just controls his break, everything he does as a punt returner, as a kick returner, he's phenomenal. I'm not saying he's going to be Devin Hester, but he's going to have huge impacts on special teams, especially with these new kickoff rules. I think that might help him a little bit. Take some of the traffic out of the way, put it all in this kind of, in the same area. Once he gets past it, he'll be gone. Excuse me. So with him, I think he's more of a safety, and it's because I don't see that natural reactive ability. People get steps on him when they give him a double move, when they give him, when they get through their break. And it's because he's just a little bit slow to react, and he doesn't quite have the length, I think, to make up for it. Because that's what you argue with a Sauce Gardner. Oh yeah, he's a little slow coming out of the break, to match the receiver, but he's got that crazy length. He can get his arms in there, disrupt the pass. You don't see that from him. So I think Cooper would be much better suited sitting in zone as a safety somewhere. I saw him in person a couple years ago at the Music City Bowl when they played Kentucky, and I had no idea who he was. He was a true sophomore at the time, and I was not tracking a lot of sophomores, especially not at Iowa. And I'm looking at him catching punts and warm-ups, and I'm like, who is this guy? I take a video. I'm like, oh, man, this guy, I want to remember this dude. Has a pick six in the game. He's hitting people left and right, and I'm like, oh, yeah, this guy's legit. But I thought even then watching him, he's more of a safety, So I'm in a safety camp with him, and it's not because we haven't had a white starting corner since like 94 or whatever. It's just more of a, he just doesn't have that twitch and that reactive ability that a lot of these other corners have. And I think that you want to utilize his skill set as a ball hawk, as somebody who's going to come downhill and deliver a good hit on somebody. I think he'd be better suited as a safety.
Sure. As far as the corners, I mean, Quinyon Mitchell, where would he compare to like last year's class? I mean, Devin Witherspoon, went 5 overall, I think, and Christian Gonzalez is in that class. Went a little later, I think, than some of us thought he was going to. But is Mitchell in that conversation?
Well, Witherspoon was another beast, right? Because he was vicious. Like he was a safety playing corner, and he had the twitch ability. And you saw that at Seattle. They really kind of helped him unlock his game and let him play downhill and let him hit people. That's where he's really got his strength. So I love physical corners, so it's really hard for me to put anybody over Devin after last year. Devin was my favorite guy on the defense in that class. I loved him, and I was like, oh, man, yeah, he's going to go kill it in Seattle. That's perfect for him. Get him in a zone type set. But, I think Mitchell's a little better than Gonzalez, because when Gonzalez slipped a little bit in the draft because he's more of a cover guy, cover corner. He wasn't as physical. He wasn't as good of a tackler. And that's becoming something that's really important at the cornerback position right now, because if you look at the shift in the wide receivers, the guys that are coming downfield at them, a lot of these schemes, 25 schemes this year in the NFL, are projected to be West Coast offenses.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's scheming guys open to get run after catch, which means if you're a corner, you got to tackle. That's why C.J. Henderson failed, as a number one corner in the league, is really even a starting corner in the league.
Sure.
That's why these cover guys typically go later, because if you don't have that physicality and you can't tackle in open space, you lose a lot of value to a roster and to a defense, because now I have to keep you in man coverage. I have to keep you in situations, and I have to make sure that I have my best tackling safety on that side of the field, or nickel or somebody to help you, because I can't leave you as a liability to let someone break a tackle and score an 80-yard touchdown.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, kind of going off of that, last year, I mean, we had Witherspoon going 5 overall. And Will Anderson went 3 overall. The draft before that, I think the first 5 picks of the draft were all defensive players. But the way our mocks are showing up right now, it seems like it's pretty offensive heavy early on in the draft. As much as like maybe the first 8 or 9 picks could be offensive players. Is that more of a commentary on how good the offensive prospects are? Is it more of a commentary on that there's not a lot of top end defensive prospects, or is it just kind of a mix of both?
Yeah, I think it's more so there's not a bunch of top tier defensive prospects, but I also think it's the rule changes that you're seeing, come to that affect defenders. It lowers their value a little bit. Yeah. Because, hey, you could put a great defense together. It still works for now. We'll see about this hip drop tackle, but someone please still explain to me what a hip drop tackle is. I still don't know.
Man. That's not going to end terribly, right?
Man. And so hopefully it doesn't end up in 15-yard penalties on the field and it's just fines, which is
Yes.
still not right.
Right.
You know, we saw a lot of fines, a lot of hits get fined last year that really shouldn't have been. Running backs were getting fined for hitting defenders. Like, come on, man, what are we doing?
Yeah.
But you know, I think the rule changes are kind of affecting it a little bit too. But if you look at the top tier edge rushers in this class, you got Jared Verse. Okay, Verse is probably your Brian Arakpo type. That's who he really measures to. That's who he plays like. Arakpo had a decent career. He wasn't great, but he had a really decent career, respectable. Could have been the defense he was with. Washington was god awful back then, but you know, he had a respectable career. And then you know you have Latu, and Latu is kind of a question with his medicals. Had medically retired from football, came back, couldn't get cleared by the University of Washington, so he goes to UCLA and they let him play. Right, so now he's been healthy, but he has that history. You know, so that's kind of a question mark on him. And then when we talk about the corners, we talked about, okay, there's two guys that the NFL really likes, and that's Arnold and that's Mitchell. Okay, there's not a linebacker.
Yeah.
We talked about the defensive tackles already. They're not that great. Right. Not compared to not guys that you want to bring in here and you're saying, oh, yeah, these are blue chip prospects. You know, so there's really not a lot of top tier defensive talent. Mm-hmm. And I think they get discounted on top of the rule changes that are affecting how defenders have to play football.
Sure. Do you see the top 10 kind of playing out then in that way as well, of like, you know, probably 8 or 9 offensive players?
I think you're going to see 8 come off the board, 8 offensive players. I'd be surprised if Dallas Turner got out of the top 10.
Sure.
And I might be surprised if Jared Verse gets out. And I think both of those guys come off around 8 and 9. You know, so that's about what I would be anticipating. Is you're probably going to see a lot of offense early. You're probably going to see a lot of trade ups too. You know, there are some desperate teams out here right now that need a quarterback and are going to be willing to pay for it.
I mean, that does bring up our next question. You know, Minnesota, they just recently made that move. Now they have pick number 23 from Houston.
Yep.
Talk is kind of all over the place. You know, what is the entry point for the top 5? What is it going to cost? You know, who's Minnesota targeting? Based on what you're hearing, you know, what do you think right now is the plan for Kwesi and for the Vikings and everything?
I think you're going to sit back the first 2 picks and you're going to see who comes off the board. You know, I don't think you're going to be able to get 2 from Washington for 11 and 23.
No, especially now with a new owner. You know, in Washington, you know, Josh Harris, he's trying to like rebuild that brand and that fan base, and you know, a franchise quarterback is like the perfect solution for that.
I will say about Washington, don't be surprised if they hold off on a quarterback.
Interesting.
Okay, and now you also have to remember Josh Harris is the owner that in the NBA with the Philadelphia 76ers came up with what was that term? Oh, trust the process.
Trust the process.
You know, hey, they understand. They hired Adam Peters, who came from San Francisco, was a huge part of that very slow, methodical rebuild. They understand that, hey, it's going to take a couple years to flip the talent on this team and get us where we want to be. So don't be too surprised if they hold off on a quarterback right away. Okay?
And do you think
they're looking to trade down?
Do you think at all with Peters? I mean, I've asked this to Dan once or twice as well, just that as a first year GM that you're kind of going like, if I jump right into the quarterback right now, then I've tied myself to this guy. And that's, you know, my general manager career now is basing off this one guy alone, where if I hold off on the quarterback, it buys me an extra year or 2 possibly.
Job security almost.
Yeah, there could be some of that. But, you know, if you think about, do I think they're going to go in with, you know, Marcus Mariota, Jake Fromm as their quarterbacks? No.
Yeah, I agree there.
I think they're going to get somebody. I don't know if that's going to be. I mean, Carson Wentz just came off, so you know he's not going to reunite in Washington.
I
know it sucks, right?
Such magical years.
Wow, 1 year, right? No, but I think that I don't know if it's going to be a veteran. I don't know if it's going to be a 2nd or 3rd round guy later on, but I think that they will address it at some point. I'm just not sold on them going right away and getting 1 or, you know, 2. Sure. I do wonder if somebody like Sean Payton moves up and pays a fortune to do it, you know, because I think there's a guy in this class that fits exactly what Payton would like to have in a quarterback, and he wants that. So I think Washington will probably sit there and take offers and consider. Okay, so if I'm sitting there with Minnesota at 11, knowing that I got 2 quarterback needy teams that are going to jump me, I got to identify who those guys like.
Yeah.
And if I'm doing my research right, I'm going to probably think that, hey, we could probably get the guy we really want after these guys pick. So let them go up there and spend all the money and spend all the picks and all the capital to jump over us and the Giants. And then we'll come back and reassess when we see how the board's falling. So I think Minnesota's got a guy that they really like, and McCown's got ties obviously to Drake May. I know that there's a lot of the fan base really likes JJ McCarthy going there. So I think it's just going to kind of depend on, hey, how does the board fall? We'll take this into consideration. And then when we get to pick 4 or pick 5, we're going to pull the trigger and go do something.
Sure. If the Broncos want to come up, what does that look like considering, all the draft picks that have gone away for Russell Wilson and even Sean Payton? I mean, does that start with Patrick Surtain?
The nice thing about the Broncos right now with their first round picks is I do believe they've recouped everything from the Russell trade.
Sure.
So you got the
minus
pick
the
this
money.
year. Well, yeah, the money part sucks, but that's kind of why you need the rookie quarterback, right?
Right.
So you've got your pick this year. I'm pretty sure. I think you've got your pick next year. You got the pick the year after. So it's probably
they're only really
missing.
They're missing a second this year. That's the big thing
that's
right now is a second.
Right. So you can send all 3 of those. Now you also have to remember when Washington made a very similar move back in 2012 and made the move to go get RG3 at 2. The price they paid was 3 firsts and some change. So I would assume 3rd round pick probably off the board this year for Denver if they make that kind of a move. I think you're going to see a bunch of picks next year. And I don't mean 1 or 2. I mean maybe 3. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of value teams are putting into those picks next year. So because the class is projected to be deeper. It's the first year we're going to have true seniors, 4th-year seniors.
Sure.
Since COVID so we're anticipating a lot more depth in next year's class overall. So those picks are going to be at a premium. So that's probably what it's going to look like. It's going to be a fortune, but don't discount Sean Payton. Don't think that he's going to sit back and say, no, the price is too steep. If he wants a guy, he lost out on Patrick Mahomes by a pick.
Yeah.
He's going to move up and make sure he can get his guy.
Sure. Absolutely. Would you, if you had to put odds on it, would you think that the Broncos are going to be more aggressive than Minnesota?
I believe so, yeah.
Wow.
And because they're behind Minnesota.
That's true.
So you have to jump Minnesota.
Yep.
You have to jump the Giants because they've entered this conversation all of a sudden.
Sure.
And if you want to be safe, you're going to have to jump New England too.
Yeah.
So that's why 2 seems like a very prime position. If I'm the Denver Broncos and I'm trying to go get a quarterback, I got to make sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Chicago's going to take Caleb Williams 1. I think that there's still some doubt across the league right now about that, which sounds crazy. Bears fans are going to lose it. They're going to be like, what do you know? It's Caleb. And then you're going to have the Justin Fields guys over there going, no, that's right. Yeah, let's go. And it's a civil war all over again, So
I already got over that civil war, man. I don't need another one of those. Already.
No, there's another one. There could be another one brewing if some of these reports start coming out. But, that's the thing is I don't think anybody really knows for sure Chicago's going to take Caleb. Okay. I think that's been assumed, but you're not going to see a move until that pick comes off the board.
Yeah.
If that move comes before the draft, it's because they know Caleb's going number 1.
Sure. Got it. Okay. And then do you think if you have, Washington trading back from there, if say the Broncos give him a haul, does Adam Peters pull his best Monty Osenfort and come back up into Gotcha. Because it seems like, like you said, you don't want to really go into the season with Marcus Mariota as your starter. So does he jump back up?
Or Jake Fromm?
Or Jake Fromm. Sure.
I wouldn't discount Jake Fromm beating out Marcus Mariota.
Absolutely.
Right
at this point in their careers, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. So they might try to jump back up. Interesting. Yeah. So top 10 could be one of the more interesting ones we've had in a long, long time.
It could. We could see. You
I'm
got the Raiders at 13 too.
Yeah.
They're in the picture too. They're trying to get up there. They want Jaden Daniels, and Daniels has made it clear, hey, I want to be a Raider.
That's a tough ask to make that happen. All right, so we're kind of talking holistically about the class right now. So I think you've kind of alluded to what your opinion is, but what positions do you think stand out as like top caliber for this class in regards to both top end talent and depth of the class?
Well, it's clear. It's offensive tackle, right? That it's one of the best offensive tackle classes we've seen in a long time. We got two guys that look really good in Fashanu and all. They'll probably go top 10, top 15. Fashanu, for some reason, is not getting mocked up that high. I don't know what's going on with that. You've got all those guys right behind him. Latham, Fatiano, is that it?
It's not fair that there's three guys that have an FAU like name in it. Oh, it's killing me.
Fawaga,
Fontanu,
yeah. So you got a bunch of tackles that are all in that group right there, right?
Yeah.
And that's not even, we didn't even get into, some of these other guys like Patrick Paul that might sneak up there, or Jordan Morgan.
Sure.
So those are guys that you want to watch in the first round for too. But yeah, the offensive tackle class is great. The wide receiver class is great. I mean, I remember it being sacrilege 3-4 months ago to suggest that any wide receiver was number one outside of Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah.
Now that's kind of changed a little bit. Now it's kind of like you're seeing a lot of Rome Odunze, you're seeing a lot of Malik Neighbors, and there's a really good class behind them that's going to go 3-4 rounds deep into the draft. So those would be the top two positions. The quarterback class is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's pretty good. It's got some depth. It's got a lot of guys when you start to get into the later rounds that this guy could be a chance. Especially with 6th, 7th round picks being high priority free agents this year because of the lack of depth. People are going to be taking people they don't want to compete with in free agency after the draft. So you got all that. That's pretty much that'd be it.
That's the end of the road. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you think it's worth paying a premier pick then on those positions? I mean, I know the top of the class, like you just mentioned, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. Is it worth it that much more to be taking one of those guys than to trading back a little bit for what the next tier of those guys is? I mean, these are like the three definitely in this class, but is it that much worth a premier pick to take one of those top guys versus trading back, maybe getting yourself a good offensive tackle and a wide receiver in the second round?
It depends on the situation, right? So much of the draft is situational based. There's no rhyme or reason to team building, and you want to assess everything on your team and go, all right, here's what we can address. Here's what we want to take care of. The first thing I want to take care of is your quarterback, or have a future plan for a quarterback, something. You want to have your quarterback question answered. After that, you want to have your offensive line, particularly your tackles, taken care of. Okay, your offensive line is next. You got to protect that quarterback. Then you got to go disrupt the other quarterback, and that's your defensive line. So those are your top three priorities, I think, if you're team building. So let's say I have a clear need at a defensive tackle. Jerzon Newton, Johnny Newton, and Byron Murphy are on the board. Okay, I got to take one if I need that. But I might need a wide receiver. Okay, so if I know there's a lot of depth at wide receiver, there's not a lot of depth at defensive tackle, I got to take the defensive tackle.
Sure.
Because that's my bigger need. That's what I need to address. I can still get the wide receiver in the next round. So not every team follows that philosophy, as we've seen.
Of course.
Every team's a little bit different. You want to see what drafting trends look like. Who have they taken recently? Who's this GM like? What type of players does he like? Go to the offensive line coaches. What types of players do they like? Because that tells you a lot about who they're going to target. That's why, all these different trends and stuff gives you a really good idea where the board is. That's why, you watch these pre-draft, series videos that these teams put out, and they show them doing their mock draft on the whiteboard 3 days before the draft. They're nailing every single pick. And not every mock draft is doing that, right? It's because they spend so much time scouting the other teams and understanding, okay, this offensive line coach over here with the Titans, let's take, Bill Callahan, for example. Bill really likes 6'6" tackles at 315 pounds, right? That's what he likes, so that's the type of tackle he's going to go take.
Right.
So if the Titans need a tackle, Joe Alt is going to fill in pretty good. He's a little bit bigger, but they'll work with that. He plays low, so you're not worried about that. So Joe Alt makes sense, so when you get to 7 and Joe Alt's still on the board, you're like, yep, Titans.
There it is.
Right.
Yep.
So trends give you a really good idea of what teams are going to take. So it's all situationally based.
Mm,
Me personally, my philosophy would be if I don't have those 3 areas addressed, that's where I need to go first.
sure.
That's where I need, even if the wide receiver class wasn't that great.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I can live with a dime, a dozen a dime wide receiver for a year, a filler, and then come back next year and try to address that, assuming that I can lock up everything else in those position groups. Every single team that's won the Super Bowl the last 6, 7, 8, 10 years really has had a solid defensive line. A lot of times they have a rotation. Everybody's doing a rotation now, but
Right.
specifically, the Eagles started that in the 17 when they made their Super Bowl run, beat the Patriots. It was a rotation.
Yep.
Everybody started doing it. And now offensive line, like you got to be able to protect your quarterback. You got to be able to run the ball. Team that runs the ball usually wins the Super Bowl.
Absolutely. So is there any guys that you think, if I don't know how often you're reading, the national guys mock drafts and everything, but are there any guys that you think are getting mocked far too high, and any guys that people are way too low on that you think are going to jump up a lot higher? Anything that stands out to you?
I think we kind of talked about Jackson Powers Johnson. I think he's a little bit too high right now.
Sure.
I think that I've seen mocks as high as 15 or 16 with him. I don't think he's going to go that high. Mm-hmm. He's got some real issues in his lower body that he's going to have to address. And, he's a power guy. He's got some really fun reps on tape.
Yeah.
But it's not great. So it's not great all the time. He had a couple really – like the first game I put on was Utah. I watched him play Utah, and he tore Utah apart. It was one of his best games of the year.
Yeah.
So I was talking to one of my buddies, and I texted him, and I was like, he was telling me, oh, yeah, he's got issues. I'm like, are you sure about this? He's like, you're watching the Utah game, aren't you? I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, put on any other game. And I did, and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I see it now. So that's going to be an issue, I think, for him, and that's going to push him down much later. He could sneak up in there, as I mentioned earlier.
Sure.
I think he's a guy that's a little too high. I don't know if Troy Franklin's going to go first round either.
Yeah.
I really don't. He had the hand issues. You saw it on tape too.
Right.
I mean, even going back to the Utah game, I'm not just trying to pick on Oregon guys here. I like Oregon. I really like Dan Lanning. But he had some real hands issues, especially going deep. And if you're a deep ball wide receiver, granted, he's a very, very good route runner. His route tree was one of the best I saw all year.
Right.
But when you're a deep route runner and you're having trouble tracking the ball, that's not good, buddy. That's not good. Hey, you gotta shore that up. And you saw it through the gauntlet. You saw those issues that he had with his hands and just locating the ball. And I think that will push him out of the first round too.
I think he had like a 4.41, if I'm remembering right, too, which isn't like awful, but like at his size is not anything that's like blowing anybody out of the water.
Yeah, I gotta take a look. I gotta look at that. I thought it was a little bit faster.
I might be wrong.
Could be wrong.
I thought I remember.
He also had.
Oh no, you nailed it. 4.41. Dang, I thought it was faster than that.
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, he was not all that high considering what his size is. So yeah.
He also had the gauntlet drill, right?
Right. Where he couldn't run a straight line.
Yeah. You just know what a straight line looks like.
Fading away from the ball and not really collecting it. Yeah, it was not good.
Yeah, but I mean, this is kind of getting outside of the draft class, but like for someone who's worked in the scouting industry for a while, and you see a player going through the combine, the gauntlet drill like that, is that like poor preparation on his agent's part? Like, did he not rep that enough before getting to the combine? Like, what would your initial takeaway be seeing a player go through a drill like that and kind of mess it up so poorly? I mean, he caught every ball, so it's not like he failed the drill. Like, he caught every ball, but like the thing coaches and scouts are looking for is the fact that you are just running a straight line, so you can be where your quarterback is predicting you're going to be, and you're also not, creating a buffer zone by creating more time for the ball to get to you. Like when you see something like that happen, where do you think the player is failing?
You got to go back to the tape. You got to go back to the tape and look at that. And that's what I'm saying is he had hands issues on tape.
Sure.
So with that was just a highlight, right? It was like, okay, that matches what I saw on tape. Evaluation done, right?
Yeah.
Got to figure it out. If it doesn't match what you saw on tape, back to the tape, right? That's the rule. If you're ever in doubt, go back to the tape. It doesn't lie. Okay, so You know, if you were watching a gauntlet drill and this guy had really good hands all year and caught through contact and made contested catches all year and had no issue with it, you're going to have to go back in and look at it again and say, okay, is there anything I'm missing here? Okay, that's when we start talking about the agent prepping them badly for that drill, or what did that training routine look like? Now you down with them as a team and go, what was your pre-draft training routine when you went down to Bomberitos and you were working out down there? You know, like what did that look like? Yeah, no, it's with Troy though, and specifically that did show up on tape many times. He had a pretty high drop rate, if I remember correctly. 9 drops last year.
Right.
And stayed consistently around 10% throughout his career. Like, that's kind of an issue.
Not great. Not great. All right. Well, we're not going to keep you all night, John. So one last question before we get you out of here. Kind of what is your feather in the cap prospects? Who are you pounding the table for so early in a process, 1 year, and then the player hit and you're just like, yes, like that was it. Like, who is your guy?
I think this is the one I'm famous for. It's Jalen Hurts. You know, I was very staunchly in the Jalen Hurts camp going into the 2020 draft cycle. It was like in 2019. I was like, yeah. And I got lucky that year is really what it was. You know, when you look back on it and you're like, man, I had access to every Oklahoma game on all 22, so I could watch and break down what he was doing, and I really liked the way that he was processing. And you'd seen that consistent growth. You know, the first couple of years at Alabama were rough, you know, but Dan Enos comes up there for the first time. Alabama hired a quarterbacks coach. You know, back then the offense coordinator was the quarterbacks coach, and so they bring in Dan Enos, and you could see just sitting that year behind Tua when he comes into the SEC championship game how much better of a passer he's become, and he's still using his legs. And I'm like, he goes to Oklahoma. I wrote an article that May predicting he'd win the Heisman, and I was off just a little bit.
Just a little.
He was second. He was second to Joe Burrow. You know, Joe Burrow had that amazing year.
Who would have known? Who would have known?
No. And I watched a lot of Burrow that offseason too, and I really liked Burrow, but I didn't like him that much.
Yeah.
You know, so with Jalen was my guy. I think if you go through a couple other classes, I don't like to rag on guys negatively, but sometimes you can see trends. You can see, hey, like the CJ Henderson. I was not a CJ Henderson fan. Sure. But you know, you gotta like your hits. You gotta say, hey, I was right about that guy. I wish he'd done better. Or in the Jalen situation, he fell into the perfect situation. That couldn't have been any better for him. The team gravitated around him, which was, you know, you put him in any other place other than Philadelphia, is he Jalen Hurts?
Right.
Probably not, you know? So I got lucky, you know, that's the thing. And that's kind of how you have to look at it when there's a guy that you pound the table for, and it's really all still about fit at the end of the day. Like, I'll give you, I don't like Jordan Jefferson when he came out.
Sure.
You know, I was not a fan of him. And I think I'm not getting his name mixed up, right? The Minnesota wide receiver. Justin. Thank you. So, yeah, I didn't like Justin Jefferson when he came out. I was like, hell, he was the number 2 to Jamar Chase, and you know, he benefited from that. And I didn't think he was a great route runner. Oh man, I was way off. You know, and what's funny is sometimes the thing is, I'll meet famous people, and I'm not the type of guy that walks up there and is like, hey, can I get a picture with you? Because they're going to forget about you the minute that you walk away, because everybody's like, can I get a picture with you? And what am I going to do with that picture? Post on social, be like, hey, look who I met.
Right.
Did I really meet him, or did I just like run into him and get a picture with him, you know?
Yep.
And so I was at the Senior Bowl this year, and I run into Jerry Rice, and he was sitting at downstairs in the Renaissance at this bar that's having the restaurant. And when I saw him, like, I knew he was there. I'd seen him walking around like on the field and stuff. I knew he was there, but when I saw him just sitting there, I kind of did a double take. Like, is that who I think it is? And he saw me do that. And so at that point, I just walked up like I knew him and started talking, you know, and we were talking about, you know, Brendan, his son, who is down there at the Senior Bowl this year. He's a draft prospect. And I was like, yeah, I didn't think he had a bad week. He's like, man, I'm telling you, I've been telling that kid he's got to get his hips down. He can't be doing this whole running around up and down through his breaks and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not quite computing what he's saying yet, right? Like because I played some wide receiver. I didn't get super technical with it. I like corner better, but it was like I wasn't quite computing. I'm like, what's he talking about? Hey, when you get up to the top of a break, he gets up out of his chair to show me what he's talking about, right? When you get to the top of a break and you see guys sink their hips down because they're trying to change direction, they're trying to lower their center of gravity so they can get through that break faster. You're telling the DB what you're doing.
I'm about to break.
So like now he's going to react to you. You got to already be down there. He said, when I ran routes, I was always low. I never moved. My hips were smooth. And after he told me that, I went back and I pulled up like videos of like the NFL put out of the greatest route runners ever. And you see that consistently.
How many times?
If you see a guy that can run a route, right, and he just gets through his break, he's not pumping his head over here. He's not, I'm sinking my hips down like Chase Claypool. I'm not, throwing my body all over the place trying to sell this thing. They just go through it. They are elite. And you look at Alad McConkey. You look at, I think Malik Neighbors runs like that.
Mm-hmm.
Romo Dunze has a little bit of that to him too. These guys stay low. Their pad level's so low that when they hit their break, they're out of it. And that's what I had to learn, as evaluating.
Not a bad
receivers.
Teacher to have you learn.
Oh no, just the greatest wide receiver of all time.
No big whoop.
Yeah, that's the thing is, you want to approach these people, I think, with the intention of being a student of the game. And if you approach them with that, hopefully you can take something away. If you can't give something back to them, hopefully you give them the satisfaction of being able to pass on something.
Absolutely. Well, we're all students from listening to you tonight, John, and we really appreciate having you on here. Do you want to tell the people where they can find you for all your socials and everything?
So Draft Vogel on X, I think that's what we're calling it now.
Yeah.
Finally starting to switch around to it. I still say Twitter all the time, and I'm like, X, whatever it is, I don't know.
You still tweet. You still tweet at the end of the day.
No, they're calling them posts now. That's what's a little bit odd. They're not tweets anymore. We still refer to them as tweets, just like we still call it Twitter.
Right.
But they're calling them posts now. So at Draft Vogel there, and then just follow, check out the Sick Podcast with Draft Vogel. We talk more so about how to evaluate talent than talent itself, right? Because, you can get on here and listen to, man, I don't know if I'm going to do it. Screw it. You can listen to the Ryan Roberts and those types of people get on their podcast and say, this guy's my number one. Like, he's great in this class. Da, 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 da. Okay, that's cool. Tell me why.
Yeah.
Tell me what it is that makes him better than everybody else. And so we want to take, when we started the show, we wanted to kind of take the C.O. Bricado approach. He was a great scout in the NFL. He died a few years back. But inside the league, it has a seminar every year at the NFL Combine where they present the C.O. Bricado Award, and it goes to the scout that was the most open, that passed on the most knowledge, that has given the most back to the game, because that's what C.O. did. C.O. had that open. We need to keep the art of scouting alive. We need to pass on our knowledge to everybody, because that doesn't just benefit for us. It benefits the players coming into the league. It benefits football. And so, that's what we wanted to take with the approach was C.O. Bricado style. Let's go in here. Let's talk about the art of scouting and what it is that you're looking for in players to make you, hopefully, by listening to our podcast, a better scout.
Awesome. All right, John, it was a great time having you on. It always is. We will definitely have to reconnect during the summer, do a little summer scouting stuff. But you guys, make sure you follow John and all his work. When I tell you this guy's probably forgotten more football than I know, I'm not even joking.
I don't know about that. And see, that's the thing is you surround yourself around people that forget more football than and that's when you're in a good place, right? You want to keep doing that. I got guys that have forgotten way more football than I'll ever know.
All right, but you guys, stay tuned to the channel. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, follow us on all our socials. We have plenty of pre-draft coverage coming. You guys have a nice night and enjoy your football.
Take care.